Well, welcome to Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short coming at you with another analysis video. And we like to talk about things that are in the news that have biblical implications, that the values of the Bible have talked about, that have addressed, that God has spoken. We need to remember that in the Bible, God has spoken. And we have to act like He has spoken. We have to respond to what He has spoken. We can't just ignore it. We can't just pretend, oh, that Bible is just a religious book. We can treat it any way we want. No, we have to treat it the way it really is, and that is revelation from God. So today we have a situation where there is a professor in New York State who actually advocates and is sympathetic to child sex between a child and an adult, or in other words, called pedophilia. This professor is actually sympathetic to that, and we need to expose this garbage. This is evil, and we need to push back against all normalizing of sexual deviancy and perversion. We're seeing all kinds of sexual perversions and deviance come into our culture now through the LGBTQ movement. We see this big push to accept every type of immoral, perverted, deviant, sick and twisted sexual expression. That's our culture. It's advocating for the normalization of every kind of evil you can imagine. This is Romans 1 culture actually materializing before us in our culture here in the 21st century. We see that once God is let go, once God is rejected, then anything can happen, and this is what we're seeing happening right before our very eyes. And so we need to call it out, we need to expose it, we need to talk about it. We can't just pretend it's not there. Now, a lot of churches like to totally ignore all of this because they're uncomfortable with it. It's unpopular. People will not like it because it is criticizing something, but we have to criticize error. If we're all about the truth, and we are as Christians, then we have to treat the truth as holy and as sacred, and we have to criticize lies, errors, evil, wickedness. We need to let people know what is valid and what is not valid. So here's an example of something that is really, really disgusting and is creeping into our culture. It's called pedophilia. It's adult child sex. And here is someone who is flirting around with advocating it. The headline here is calls for growing SUNY, that's State University, New York, SUNY Fredonia, to fire professor after comments go viral. And he made comments that were positive toward pedophilia, that is adult child sex. SUNY Fredonia officials canceled all Professor Stephen Kirshner's classes Thursday. He had suggested that adult child sex is acceptable. That is a perverted stand to have, if there ever was one. Let's roll this little short WGRZ Channel 2 clip, and I'll jump in at certain points and comment on it. So let's roll that clip.
Now to an update on a story that we brought you last night. Outrage over a SUNY Fredonia professor's comments suggesting that adult child sex is acceptable.
The university canceled all of philosophy professor Stephen Kirshner's classes today, and our Danielle Church reports there's a growing call from SUNY Fredonia students to remove him from their staff.
More than 8,000 people have signed this change.org petition since Wednesday, calling for SUNY Fredonia to fire philosophy professor Stephen Kirshner.
When I saw the video on Twitter, it was disgusting, and it's outraged me.
That's after a YouTube video of his comments on adult child sex went viral. Olivia Sylvester is a sophomore at the university. She started the petition, and to be transparent, is also the daughter of a Channel 2 employee.
Okay, right here, I have to really applaud this young woman because her generation is actually on the forefront of normalizing all kinds of sexual perversion and deviant sexual behavior. So her culture is all in on the LGBTQ movement. They're all in on gay marriage. I think it's like 80% of millennials are for that. And the generation coming up after them, it's just even more. So her, at this young age, resisting that and pushing back and saying, no, this is wrong, this is evil, you have to hand it to her. She has a lot of bravery because you know that there are going to be advocacy groups, the LGBT advocacy groups, and a lot of liberal, progressive Democrats and the radical left, and they're going to probably try to cancel her because they're going to argue that she's being puritanical, prudish, she's being old-fashioned, and they want basically no rules when it comes to sexuality. And so you have to hand her, give her an award for bravery because she's really standing up to this garbage. And we need more young people to do that. But unfortunately, most of the young people are actually waiting for the older adults in the room to speak up and say, no, this is wrong. So it's a shame that this young girl was the one that actually had to expose this perverted professor and not his administrators, his co-professors, and the faculty and the adults that are supposed to be responsible. It's a shame that she had to, as a student at the university, to actually step forward and be brave and say, no, this is wrong. So let's go on.
Just not like the type of person who can just sit there and do nothing when like I go to this campus, I feel the effects of this.
SUNY Fredonia announced this week that the university is reviewing the matter. Meanwhile, Kirshner is now being represented by the Lipsitz, Green, Chimay, Cambria law firm.
There's no criminal anything here. This is nothing but speech. There's no advocacy, there's no facilitation, there's no aiding and abetting. They're just debating these things back and forth as philosophy professors in a college.
Okay, now here's the lawyer for this professor that is advocating pedophilia, and he's trying to argue, well, he wasn't actually trying to solicitate sex with a minor. He was not actually trying to do anything illegal. No one accused him of trying to do anything personally illegal. No one is accusing him with pedophilia. They're simply saying his views are so outrageously immoral, evil, and wicked that he shouldn't be allowed to teach at any university in the civilized world. That's what we're saying. So this lawyer is trying, well, like a lawyer does, he's trying to lawyer the issue and saying, well, my client actually never actually broke the law because he never tried to solicit sex from a minor. He didn't try to bring a minor over state lines. He didn't try to organize any pedophilia ring. He didn't try to do anything criminal. No, that's not what is at issue here. What is at issue here is here is a sexual pervert in his mind and in what he's professing, and he's normalizing or trying to downplay the severity of the evil and sinfulness and the immorality of pedophilia. So he's softening up hearts and minds at that young age, and he's influencing people. He's an influencer on campus, and he's a teacher, and he's an authority figure at the college because of his status as professor. So he is teaching what is reprehensible. It may not be criminal what he's teaching, but that doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean that it's not wrong. So what he's teaching is wrong, it's evil, it's sinful, it's wicked, and the student is right for pointing it out. Now the lawyer also says something absurd. He says, well, he's just discussing this hypothetically. He's just conversing and debating like professors do on college campuses. Now wait, we've been told by the left for years now that having a conservative speaker on campus is unsafe for the students. To actually have someone like a Ben Shapiro come to a Cal State or a USC or some other university. Just having a conservative like a Shapiro, like a Matt Walsh, like some other Charlie Kirk, like some other conservative, just to have them come and speak. The students have to protest and petition the faculty, and the administration has to ban the speaker because of his radical views, so-called radical views, and his hate speech, so-called, against the LGBTQ community for his views and expressions of morality. They have to ban him and shut him down and prohibit him from speaking like a Ben Shapiro on campus. So what is this professor talking about? Oh, well, they're just professors. They're just talking about things, debating, discussing, conversing about issues that are controversial. Well, the left has been saying you can't do that, that we have to protect the students from hate speech. Well, here is an example of someone not talking about hate speech, so-called, but something far worse, and that is sex between adults and children, which is reprehensible. This has always been morally reprehensible in societies all over the world for as long as time has been. And now this lawyer is trying to say, well, they're just talking about it. Yeah, that's the problem. You can't have it both ways. If you're a radical leftist and you're talking about pedophilia and students object and parents object and the community is outraged and they don't want you teaching and they don't want you speaking and influencing students, that's something that needs to be heard. Because you were the ones that were arguing that the conservative speakers are hurting people and it's an unsafe environment for them and so on and so forth, which was totally a bogus argument. But you were making that argument. Okay, well then understand the argument now when it flips around and someone is teaching something like what this professor is teaching. So which is it? Are we going to censor certain outrageous ideas, or are we not going to censor certain outrageous ideas? And is there a social price to pay for proclaiming and espousing certain ideas in a public forum, or is there not going to be a social cost for that? See, it's part of the hypocrisy of the left. They want to censor out conservative voices from campus. They claim that that's violence and hurt and hate speech, and yet now they're wanting to do that to this professor, which is good. But this leftist lawyer is saying, no, we can't do that because they're just talking and discussing and doing academic things like professors do. Right. And I'm sure that there are other professors who have such radical ideas, but once they're known, the parents and the faculty and the administrators and the people who pay for this institution have every right to say, well, wait, we don't want this kind of material, this professor and his views on campus, because they're so morally reprehensible that we don't say he doesn't have the right to say those things, but we don't want him saying those things and pay him to say those things on our campus because we have values. That's what we should be saying.
This is what you do in a college setting. Even you talk about some subjects that may be uncomfortable or displeasing or whatever, but it's just debate.
Kirshner didn't respond to a request for comment. Also, I just checked, and that petition is now at more than 10,000 signatures. SUNY Fredonia's president has just released a statement as well, saying in part, quote, that they are going to continue to investigate. He also says Professor Kirshner is being assigned duties that aren't physically on campus, and Kirshner will not have contact with students during the investigation. Reporting in the Information Center, Danielle Church, Channel 2 News.
Okay.
We are celebrating Western New York tonight.
Stop that and get back to our discussion here. So there you hear the report, and you can see why the student and some of the parents and community members are outraged. So they have every right to be outraged about this. This goes against just not only Judeo-Christian values, not only Christian values, but there are so many secular people that think this is and believe that this is reprehensible. Here's the President Stephen Collison statement. I am writing to provide you with an update on the matter involving one of our professors interviewed in a widely shared video podcast. We will continue to investigate this situation. In the meantime, effective immediately and until further notice, the professor is being assigned to duties that do not include physical presence on the campus and will not have contact with students while the investigation is ongoing. Please allow me to reiterate my earlier statement that I view the content of the video as absolutely abhorrent. Finally, good. There is finally a moral boundary here that even secular people can realize. This is like one of the only moral values that actually lines up with the Judeo-Christian worldview. And even these secular, probably very liberal leftists, they're not that radical yet. But this professor is obviously to the left of the leftists here, and they are finding that they can't even abide by his radical views. We're seeing this in the Democratic Party, by the way, because the radical left is going so far to the left. They're going so far off the reservation that even, for example, someone like a Joe Biden, radical leftist, liberal Democratic president, he is now talking to the nation and saying, no, we can't go as far as defund the police. His own side was advocating defund the police for years, a couple years now. And he is stepping in and saying, no, we really can't go that far. We don't want to do that. So even the Democrats are now fighting, the liberals, the leftists, the radicals are fighting within their own radicalism to map out the boundaries. And here is another example where leftist radicals are fighting between themselves, because this professor is a radical leftist, but he's too far left. So you have this Stephen Collison president, and you can bet that he's a liberal too. He's saying, no, I find this absolutely abhorrent. And he would probably be all in for the LGBTQ movement, but I guess he's not all in for the adding a P in that, which would be pedophilia. I cannot stress enough that the independent viewpoints of this individual professor are in no way representative of the values of the SUNY Fredonia campus. Well, there is a little bit of dishonesty in this president's viewpoint, because if you're going to talk about the values of the SUNY, that State University of New York Fredonia campus, they are predominantly secular values. So once you open up the moral Pandora's box and you start pushing for LGBTQ and all of the other acronyms in that phrase, once you start pushing the boundaries, why stop at any one point? Where is the logical consistency here? That actually this professor that's under fire here, this Professor Kirshner, Stephen Kirshner, even this guy, he is probably being more consistent than the president of the university. He is taking the view of secularism. He is taking the LGBTQ expansion of acceptable social acceptability, and he's saying, okay, we've gone this far, let's go further, and let's go further, and let's go further, and let's open up sexual freedoms even more. So he's pushing the boundaries, and this president, this liberal leftist, probably, I don't know anything about Stephen Collison, but I would assume that if he is the president of a liberal university in the state of New York, a state university, he is probably a Democrat, a leftist, and he's probably just as secular as this philosophy professor, but he isn't there yet. And he says what this professor is saying is abhorrent, this pedophilia, promotion of pedophilia, the acceptance of pedophilia, the opening up of pedophilia to acceptability. It doesn't represent the values of the campus, and that is right now, at this point, they don't represent the values. But who's to say 10 years from now? I mean, who would have thought 25 years ago that gay marriage would be legal in this country? Or who would have thought that transgenderism would be the new push? That is outrageous just a quarter of a century ago, but now it's accepted. So this president, he's saying to his people, hey, you know, we don't agree with this professor. He's gone too far. He says, I appreciate your patience as we make every effort to resolve this matter as expeditiously as possible. So the leftists are now being twisted into pretzels because they don't know how to deal with the fact that one of their own is going too far. And we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more of this over and over and over again, where once you tear down the fence, what was it? G.K. Chesterton once said, when you're walking in a field and you see a fence, don't tear it down until you know or have discovered why it was put there to begin with. Because once you tear that down, who knows what that fence was holding back. It's the same way with the Judeo-Christian moral values that have served as the foundation for Western civilization for centuries. When you start tearing down those values, the Judeo-Christian moral values, when you start tearing down that fence, you better know what you're getting into. And that's the same way with the secularists today. They're tearing down all the moral values, but they're not sure why they're there in the first place. And then they feel outraged and, as the president of this university says, abhorrent to the views of somebody like a Kirshner, Professor Kirshner, a philosophy professor, who is exploring pedophilia theoretically. And he's talking and discussing and lecturing, and he's actually testing the boundaries of morality on this most basic moral taboo. You know, sex between adults and children is a moral taboo. It's a moral boundary, and this professor is testing those boundaries, and he's seeing how far he can push it. And even the liberal leftists in the Fredonia, Sunni Fredonia, are outraged by how far he's pulled it and taken it. And yet, in 10 years, this same community will probably embrace this value. Now, I said before that this sophomore student, was outraged. It said that when I saw the video on Twitter, I was disgusted. I was outraged. You know, fantastic. I mean, we need more people to get outraged. But like I said before, where were the adults? Where were the people who hired this man? Didn't they know that he was espousing these immoral, wicked, evil, twisted views? Didn't they understand that? Yeah, they did. There were professors, there were faculty members, there were probably administrators that had already been made aware of these videos that he had put out there, or had heard some of his lectures or knew his views on these subjects. Now, many were surprised, I'm sure, because, of course, I don't think the administration and other professors, they don't spend all their time watching other professors' videos. But, you know, word gets around. You can kind of, there's a grapevine, and if you're working for this university and you're a professor and you hear things in the faculty lounge, hey, so-and-so is actually advocating for pedophilia, or at least is sympathetic toward that. That gets around, and it wasn't a secret what his views were on this, and it's really disingenuous to actually act, oh, I didn't know, probably the way this was being dealt with before it became known to the press, and this girl brought it up, was that people who knew about it just basically kept it under wraps and said, wow, he's taken things too far, or he's taken further than I would take them, but, I don't want to cause trouble for him, and I don't want to put myself in danger, because after all, there's cancel culture. So if you object to something that the cancel mob is for, they can come after you. So a lot of people are like, well, I'll just, pay attention to myself, mind my own business. And if he gets in trouble, well, that's on him. Because people are afraid that they'll be canceled. Now, in this instance, it looks like the mob is turning somewhat against him, but you never know. You never know. I don't see a huge outrage against him. There is outrage against him, but I don't see, faculty protesting this professor. I don't see the kind of energy that you might even get from, say, like a Ben Shapiro showing up at a Southern California university, and the kind of passion that the left comes out and protests against. I don't see that. Where are they? Well, it's because, like I said before, this guy is actually one of them. His worldview is secular. He assumes naturalistic evolution, and that there is probably no meaning or purpose in life other than just the material cause and effect sequence. And so they're operating pretty much on the same assumptions and presuppositions as this professor, except that they're drawing the line a little bit closer, and they're saying, yeah, no, that's going too far. Well, why? Logically speaking, why is he inconsistent with the secular worldview? Well, he's not. The secular worldview would actually teach what he's teaching. And beyond that, I mean, if there are no values from God, if there's no transcendent moral order, then all you have are preferences, human opinion. Why should one person's opinion be any stronger than any other person's opinion? Why should any other person's value trump any other person's moral value system? So if you actually work out secularism consistently as a worldview, this professor's actually following the playbook. And these leftists who are objecting, like this president of the university, they're just probably at this point just virtue signaling and saying, no, we wouldn't go that far. We wouldn't draw the line there. I mean, he's really pushing the boundaries. We wouldn't push the boundaries that far. That just means they're not there yet. But if they work out their worldview, they're going to probably come to a position that is similar to this professor's sick and twisted view. It's only just a matter of time. So we need to pray that our culture is stopped from its madness and comes back into sanity. I hope that's been a helpful commentary. We'll see you back next week. God bless.